There was music from a neighbor's house through the summer nights. In its blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars. At high tide in the afternoon, I watched his guests diving from the tower of the raft or taking the sun on the hot sand of his beach while his two motorboats slid the waters of the Sound, drawing aquaplanes over cataracts of foam. On weekends, his Rolls-Royce became an omnibus, bearing parties to and from the city between 9 in the morning and long past midnight, while his station wagon scampered like a brisk yellow bug to meet all trains. And on Mondays, 8 servants, including an extra gardener, toiled all day with mops and scrubbing brushes and hammers and garden shears, repairing the ravages of the night before. Every Friday, 5 crates of orange and lemons arrived from a fruiter in New York. Every Monday, these same oranges and lemons left his back door in a pyramid of bulbous halves. There was a machine in the kitchen which could extract the juice of 200 oranges in half an hour, if a little button was pressed 200 times by a butler's thumb. At least once a fortnight, a corps of caterers came down with several hundred feet of canvas and enormous-colored light to make a Christmas tree of Gatsby enormous garden, on buffet tables garnished with glistening hors d'oeuvre, spice-baked hams crowded against salad of harlequin, design and pasture pigs and turkeys bewitched to a dark gold. In the main hall a bar was with a real brass rail was set up and stocked with greens and liquors, and with cordials so long forgotten that most of his female guests were too young to know one from another. By 7 o'clock the orchestra arrived, no thin 5-piece affair, but a whole pit full of oboes and trombones and saxophone and viols and cornets and piccolos and low and high drums. The last swimmers have to come in from the beach now and are dressing upstairs. The car from New York are parked 5 deep in the drive, and already the hall and sounds and verandas are gaudy with primary colors and are bobbed in a strange new way and shawled beyond the dreams of Castile. The bar is in full swing and floating round of cocktail permeates the garden inside until the air is alive with chatter and laughter and casual innuendo, an introduction forgotten on the spot, an enthusiastic meeting between women who never knew each other's names. The light grew brighter as the earth lurches away from the sun, and now the orchestra is playing yellow cocktail music, and the opera of voice pitches a key higher. Laughter is easier minute by minute, spilled with prodigality, tipped out at the cheerful word. The groups change more swiftly, swell with new arrivals, dissolve and form in the same breath. Already there are wanderers, confident girls who weaves air, and there among the stouter and more stable, become from a sharp, joyous moment the center of a group, and then, excited with triumph, glide on through the sea change of faces and voices and colored under the constantly changing light. Suddenly one of these gypsies A chauffeur in a uniform of rubbing eggs blew across my lawn early that Saturday morning with a surprisingly formal note from his employer. The owner would be entirely Gatsby's, it said, if I would attend his little party that night. He had seen me several times and had intended to call on me long before, but a peculiar combination of circumstances had prevented it. Signed J. Gatsby in a majestic hand. Dressed up in white flannels, I went over to his lawn a little while after 7, and wandered around rather at ease among swirls and eddies of people I didn't know. Through here and there were the faces I had noticed on the commuting train. I was immediately struck by the number of young Englishmen dotted about, all well dressed and looking a little angry, and all taking low, earnest voices to solid and prosperous Americans. I was sure that they were selling something, bond or insurance or automobiles. They were at least agonizingly aware of the easy money in the vicinity, and convinced that I was there for a few words in the right key. The large room was full of people. One of the girls in yellow was playing the piano, and beside her stood a tall, red-haired young lady from a famous chorus, engaged in song. She had drunk a quantity of champagne, and during the course of her song she had decided, in a plea, that everything was very, very sad. She was not only singing, she was weeping too. Whenever there was a pause in the song, she filled it with gasping, broken sobs, and then took up the lyric again in a quavering soprano. The tears coursed down her cheeks, not freely, however, for when they came into contact with her heavily beaded eyelashes, they assumed an inky color and pursued the rest of their way in slow black rivulets. A humorous suggestion was made that she sing the note on her face, whereupon she threw up her hands, sank into a chair, and went off into a deep venous sleep. She had a fight with a man who says he's her husband, explained a girl at my elbow. I looked around. Most of the remaining women were now having fights with men said to be their husbands. Even Jordan's party, the quartet from East Egg, were rent asunder by dissension. One of the men was talking with curious intensity to a young actress, and his wife, after attempting to laugh at the situation, identified an wants to go home. Never heard anything so selfish in my life. We're always the first ones to leave. So are we. Well, we're almost last tonight, said one of the men sheepishly. The orchestra left half an hour ago. In spite of the wife's agreement that such malfeasance was beyond credibility, the dispute ended in a short struggle, and both wives were lifted, kicking, into the night. As I waited for my hat in the hall, the door of the library opened, and Jordan Baker and Gatsby came out together. He was saying some last word to her, but the eagerness in his manner tightened abruptly into formality as several people approached him to say goodbye. Jordan's party were calling impatiently to her from the porch, but she lingered for a moment to shake hands. "I've just heard the most amazing thing," she whispered. "How long were we in there?" "Why, about an hour. It was simply amazing," she repeated abstractedly. "But I swore I wouldn't tell it, and here I am tantalizing you." She yawned gracefully in my face. "Please come and see me." Phone book under the name of Mrs. Sigourney Howard, my aunt. She was hurrying off as she talked. Her brown hand waved a jaunty salute as she melted into her party at the door, rather ashamed that on my first appearance I had stayed so late. I joined the last of Gatsby's guests, who were clustered around him. I wanted to explain that I'd hunted for him early in the evening, and to apologize for not having known him in the garden. "Don't mention it," he enjoined me eagerly. "Don't give it another thought, old sport." The familiar expression had no more familiarity than the hand which reassuringly brushed my shoulder. "And don't forget, we're going up in the hydroplane tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Then the butler behind his shoulder. "Philadelphia wants you on the phone, sir." "All right, in a minute. Tell them I'll be right there. Good night, good night, good night." He smiled, and suddenly there seemed to be a pleasant significance in having been among the last to go, as if he had desired it all the time. "Good night, old sport, good night." But as I walked down the steps, I saw that the evening was not quite over. 50 feet from the door, a thousand lights illuminated a bizarre and tumultuous scene. In the ditch beside the road, right side up, but violently shorn of one wheel, rested a new coupe which had left Gatsby's drive not 2 minutes before. The sharp just of the wall accounted for the detachment of the wheel, which was now getting considerable attention from half a dozen curious chauffeurs. "Oh, washing his hand of the whole matter. I know very little about driving, next to nothing. It happened, and that's all I know. Well, if you're a poor driver, you oughtn't to try driving at night. But it wasn't even trying, he explained ingenuously. I wasn't even trying, and how I should feel upon the bystanders. Do you want to commit suicide? You're lucky it was just a will, a bad driver and not even trying. You don't understand, explains the criminal. I wasn't driving. There was another man in the car. The shock that followed this declaration found voice in a sustained ah as the door of the coupe swung slowly open. The crowd, it was now a crowd, stepped back involuntarily, and when the door had opened wide there was a ghostly pause. Then, very gradually, bite by part, a pale, dangling individual stepped out of the wreck, bowing tentatively at the ground with a large uncertain dancing shoe. Blinded by the glare of the lights and confused by the incessant groaning of the horns, the apparition stood swaying for a moment before he perceived the man in the duster. What's the matter? He inquired calmly. Did we run out of gas? Look! Half a dozen fingers pointing at the amputated wheel. He stared at it for a moment, and then looked upward, as though he suspected that it had dropped from the sky. It came off, someone explained. He nodded. At first I didn't notice when it stopped. A pause. Then, taking a long breath and straightening his shoulders, he remarked in a determined voice, Wonder tell me where there's a Calvine station. At least a dozen men, some of them a little better off than he was, explained to him that wheel and car were no longer joined by any physical bond. Back out, he suggested after a moment, better in reverse. But the wheels off, he hesitated. No harm in trying, he said. The caterwauling horns had reached a crescendo, and I turned away and cut across the lawn towards home. I glanced back once. A wafer of a moon was shining over Gatsby's house, making the night fine as before, and surviving the laughter and the sound of his still glowing garden. A sudden emptiness seemed to flow now from the windows and the great doors, endowing with complete insulation. The figure of the host was stood on the porch, his hand up in a formal gesture of farewell. Reading over what I have written so far, I see I have given the impression that the events of 3 nights several weeks apart were all that absorbed me. On the contrary, they were merely casual events in a crowded summer, and, until much later, they absorbed me infinitely less than personal affairs. Most of the time I walked. In the early morning the sun threw my shadow westward as I hurried down the wide chasm of lower New York to the provided rest. I knew the other clerks and young bond salesmen by their first names, and lunched with them in dark, crowded restaurants on little pig sausages. was the gloomiest event of my day, and then I went upstairs to the library and studied investment and security for a conscientious hour. There were generally a few rioters around, but they never came into the library, so it was a good place to work. After that, if the night was mellow, I strolled down Madison Avenue, past the old Murray Hill Hotel, and over the 33rd Street to the Pennsylvania Station. I began to like New York, the racy, adventurous feel of it at night, and the satisfaction that the constant flicker of men and women and machines gives to the restless eye. I like to walk up Fifth Avenue and pick out romantic women from the crowd and imagine that in a few minutes I was going to enter into their lives, and no one will ever know how to prove. Sometimes in my mind I followed them to their apartment on the corner of hidden streets, and they turned and smiled back at me before they faded through a door into warm darkness. At the enchanted metropolitan twilight, I felt a haunting loneliness sometimes, and felt it in others the poor young clerks who loitered in front of windows, waiting until it was time for a solitary restaurant dinner. Young clerk in the dusk was wasting the most poignant moments of night and life. Again at 8 o'clock, when the dark lanes of the 40s were lined 5 deep with troubling taxicabs bound for the theatre district, I felt a sinking in my heart. Forms leaned together in the taxis as they waited, and voices sang, and there was laughter from unheard jokes, and lighted cigarettes made unintelligible circles inside. Imagine that I, too, was riding towards Katie and sharing their intimate excitement. I wished them well. For a while I lost sight of Jordan Baker, and then in midsummer I found her again. At first I was flattered to go places with her, because she was a golf champion and everyone knew her name. Then it was something more. I wasn't actually in love, but I felt a sort of tender curiosity. I bored out the face that she turned to the world. Concealed something, most affectation concealed something eventually, even though they don't in the beginning, and one day I found what it was. When we were on a house party together up in Warwick, she left a borrowed car out in the rain, went the top down, and then lied about it, and suddenly I remembered the story about her that had eluded me that night at Daisy's. At her first big golf tournament, there was a row that nearly reached the newspaper, a suggestion that she had moved her ball from a bad lie in the semi-final round. The thing approached the proportion of a scandal, then died away. A caddy retracted his statement, and the only other witness admitted that he might have been mistaken. The incident and the name had remained together in my mind. Jonathan Baker instinctively avoided clever, shrewd men, and now I saw that this was because she left safer on a plane where any diversion because she passed too close to some workman that the offender flicked a button on one man's coat. "You're a rotten driver," I protested. "Either you ought to be more careful, or you oughtn't to drive at all." I am careful." "No, you're not." "Well, other people are," she said lightly. "What's that got to do with it?" They'll keep out of my way," she insisted. "It takes two to make an accident. Suppose you meet somebody just as careless as yourself. I hope I never